straight to the business of the exchange. Now, the year has just begun and a lot is already unfolding in the world of financial markets. When you look at what's happening currently in at least the Uganda Stock Exchange and the rest of the markets, the Treasury bond market has been so strong recently, and there is a yield that is rising on the bonds that have been issued in the several past years. One of them being the 120 billion bond that was issued in 2018. Now at a yield of 18.5%. One of the things you should be definitely looking out for if you are an investor. Treasury bonds are the safest and most reliable investments. However, the returns, of course, vary depending on the seasons and depending on the interest rates within the land. The Central Bank of Uganda, that's the Bank of Uganda, actually has been stabilizing the central bank rates. Currently, it stands at 9.5%. And according to the annual report, when you look at the central bank's annual report, inflation was down last year on average by 4.6%, implying we expect most of the interest rates to be within at least 18 to 20%. Last year, the interest rates were quite high as well, and this was due to the impact that COVID-19 had on the economy and a couple of other factors that influenced the rise in the interest rates. However, this year, we are easing it a little bit, and the Treasury bonds are no exception. But let's get to the Uganda Stock Exchange, first and foremost, and have a look at how the stock market is doing in Uganda. Now, the last weekday of trading, Friday last week, we saw at least just 188,517 shares that were traded, corresponding to a market value of just 10.8 million shillings in the Ugandan Stock Exchange. Compared with the previous trading day, the Uganda Securities Exchange data shows a 49% decline in the volume and a 56% decline in the turnover as well. Current market capitalization, however, ladies and gentlemen, is 15.9 trillion Uganda shillings. Now, the Uganda Stock Exchange has 19 equities that are listed on the exchange. And amongst these, we had 6 of them participate in trade, which is one of the highest number of stocks, at least that we have participating in trade on the same day. However, the day ended with 3 gainers and 5 losers on the market, with Equity Bank Limited coming in the first position. Equity Bank at least had an appreciation of 0.67%, up to at least a share price of 855.14 Ugandan shillings per share. And Equity Bank Holdings is still one of the top stocks in terms of market capitalization. Once had at least the most valuable stock on the exchange as well. Equity Bank Limited is based in Kenya. It's a Kenyan financial institution and currently serves over 90 branch network, which includes at least 350 Visa-branded cards, automatic teller machines, and 2,500 point of sale terminals and cashback services as well. The bank commenced business in registration in 1984, and since then the bank has evolved as one of the largest commercial banks within the East African region, with one of the biggest customer bases in the region as well. Equity Bank in Kenya holds at least 48% of bank accounts and comprises of at least all over 2.8 million accounts. Equity Bank, however, got listed on the Uganda Stock Exchange, or sorry to say, cross-listed on the Uganda Stock Exchange on the 18th of June 2009. And under the ticker symbol EBL, the company has been trading stock currently valued at 3.17 trillion Ugandan shillings. Now, this 3.17 trillion makes about 19.9% of the entire USE equity market. Looking at the current pricings, Equity Bank Limited at least is valued at least of about 855 Ugandan shillings. And when you compare this with the previous day, they had an appreciation of at least 5.72 Ugandan shillings on their price in the last trading day. When you look at the number of deals, we have hardly had any activity on the bank ever since the year began, which is quite sad, but not so unfamiliar with cross listings here on the Uganda Stock Exchange. And when you look at the company's total turnover in the year, still we haven't had any trading done in that regard for Equity Bank Limited. However, there were quite a number of sagas last year that Equity Bank was going through, and news has been coming out over the bank's non-issuance of loans and, of course, confiscation of certain monies that different account holders were actually having at the bank. However, these were still unclear by the clock of 31st December on what the logical conclusions could be for the bank here in Uganda. The bank continues to still be one of the biggest banks in East Africa and one of still the most traded on stocks in the Nairobi Securities Exchange trading. Away from equity, Jubilee Holdings Limited stock came in the second position with a total appreciation of 0.24%. Now, Jubilee Holdings Limited is an insurance company. Also, is among the cross listings that are cross listed from Nairobi Securities Exchange. However, in Uganda, it was listed on the 14th of February 2006. We'll be making almost 20 years in the next couple of years to come, 2 years or so from now. The International Securities Identification Number for the stock is 273, of course with a KE, given that this is a cross listing. The company currently holds at least the 10th most valuable stock on the Uganda Stock Exchange, with a market capitalization of at least 261 billion Ugandan shillings. Now, the Jubilee Holdings Limited stock appreciated on at least Friday by 10.57 shillings up to a closing price of 4,359 Ugandan shillings. That is closing off the day. And when you look at the current market activity, still Jubilee Holdings, like equity, similar story, hasn't had much trading happening. Yes, cross listings can be frustrating. I really understand, and I've met so many investors who have at least not understood the criteria that the US uses in order to see that these companies are cross listed. But the activity is still low, and I have partly what could be an explanation. Here's a scenario. When we have a company that is cross-listed, already primary listing takes a lot of effort, a lot of investment. You're looking at massive investment by the company to be able to mobilize for funds, to be able to mobilize new investors. And then now on a cross-listed stock, especially when that company is not present physically in that particular location, it can be quite difficult to convince a foreigner that you will have a certain stock that is cross-listed from another country and not present in my own country, that this is going to be a worthy investment or venture. It's really, really hard to convince someone. And I think that could be one of the reasons or the attributes of lack of activity when it comes to these cross-listed stocks. However, there has been still a few stocks like Centum, for example, that have had activity on the exchange. And these have mainly been during the periods when they issue a dividend, maybe when they have some news of some sort, when you have maybe financial statements coming in very well for the company, that could trigger some bit of activity. But also the other reason is because in Uganda and in the rest of East Africa, we are mainly dependent on institutional investors like NSSF and a couple of other big companies that are investing, or institutions that are investing in the stock market. Now, when you have some of these, they wouldn't want to get out for capital gains. They would want to maybe come up with the dividends every once in a while, because this money, first of all, doesn't belong to them. Secondly, they are supposed to maintain their portfolios in a particular picture, maybe due to certain regulations, maybe due to certain rules. However, that can actually come to the detriment of activity. And when I talk about activity, it's the buying and selling. We need stocks to be bought and then to be sold as well. So this is one of the challenges we are having currently, and most of the cross listings really have a similar story to them. very little activity, very little liquidity. And that is exactly why they are some of the things that we are seeing that we are actually encountering on the market on these cross listings are happening. On the other hand, the losing side had a couple of stocks as well, including NMG or Nation Media Group, which came out last with a depreciation of at least 2.3% and at a closing price of over 483 Ugandan shillings per share. This was followed by the East African Breweries Limited with a 0.99% depreciation as well. The other stocks included KCB and Kenya Airways that lost some bit of value in the day. Now, like I mentioned earlier, we had 6 participants in the market, a pretty good number for a market like ours. Now, the topmost trader in terms of the volume, of course, was Stanbic Bank Uganda. And Stanbic this time sold out over 17,000, or rather 117,000 shares on the market. And this company was followed strictly by National Insurance Corporation with 35,874 shares, and Cipla Quality Chemical Industries with 14,515 shares, and whereas Umeme had at least 13,900. Amongst most of these, the price did not change, and as per my data here, we didn't have any price changes on the participating parties or on the participating equities in the Uganda Securities Exchange. Now, regarding the performance of the USE All Markets All Share Index, the index at least that tracks the top or the aggregate performance of all the listed, both cross-listed and domestic listed equities. And this one showed that there was a decline slightly in the performance of the stocks, generally speaking, with a 0.32 depreciation on points, down to 883.19 points, representing a current 1-week loss of at least 49% and a 4-week loss of 1.18%, but an overall year-to-date gain of at least 1.23%. That is what we are having currently on the Uganda Securities Exchange All Share Index. We still do have another index that's very interesting, the Local Company Index, or the LCI. Now, this one decreased, consequent of the poor performance of some stocks. Let's see what could have caused this decline. Now, the points declined to 272.59. This is a 1-week gain, however, of 9%, 0.29%, and a 4-week loss of 1.12%, and yet an overall year-to-date gain of at least 27%. The local company index gives us a good picture because most of the activity that we see on the exchange is due to the local companies. And when I talk local companies, I'm talking about those companies that are listed domestically here in Uganda. Those are companies that we know of as Stanbic Bank, maybe Umeme, the Cipla Quality Chemical stocks, and the like. Now, for the domestic listings also, this year, Umeme will be closing their consensus or concession period with the government of Uganda for supplying and distributing electricity in Uganda. This concession was agreed and signed on in 2004, and since then the company has been able to at least distribute or supply electricity within the country and abroad as well. Umeme is also cross-listed on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. If you are out there and you're a broker, it seems like there's a lot of calls coming in for you for probably Umeme stock. Either people are buying into it or they are selling. Absolutely, it's crazy because this is a time like no other. When a company is going to delist, there are several measures that are actually implemented to ensure that there's a smooth transition. If there's a new company coming, it's not automatic that they will list on the exchange. So there must be things that can be done in order to have a smooth transition or a smooth exit from the exchange. Now, when you look at Umeme stock, it got listed on the 30th of November 2012, exactly over 12 years ago. And this company currently, when you look at their identification number 1145 and Umeme's current market capitalization, which is at least 650 billion shillings, that represents about 4.08% of the entire equity market in the Uganda Securities Exchange. Umeme currently holds a stock that is valued at 400 shillings per share. And when you look at their previous performance, they have performed quite well with a one-year performance of 66%. The stock, however, closed this last day of trading with just over 400 shillings per share on the Uganda Securities Exchange. Umeme also, in terms of trading or the stocks that are traded on or the active stocks, it comes in position number 4. And when you talk about Umeme currently, it's over in the last 3 months. We've had at least from the 10th of October to the 12th of January, the company has at least traded a total of 4.74 trillion. And when you look at the magnitude of the turnover, we have about 580,000 shares that have also been traded on the Umeme stock. That is Umeme stock for you there. Hopefully you will be able to grab a chance as well before the close of the business for Umeme here in Uganda. Looking at the local company index and the all-share index, generally speaking, the Uganda Securities Exchange is quite healthy for the start of the year. However, there's more need to invest in more IPOs that we can await for in the near future. The recent IPO, Airtel Uganda, currently is valued at 93.7 shillings per share. Remember, on listing, they had a listing price of 100 Ugandan shillings, and since then it has dropped to 93.7 Ugandan shillings. Let's see. British American Tobacco Uganda still stuck at 15,000. Bank of Baroda still stuck at 15 shillings. And Centum Investments up to at least 198.18. And Mr. Of course, one of the things that we are looking at here is DFCU Bank, East African Breweries Limited, Equity Bank Limited, Jubilee Holdings, and a couple of other stocks as well. That's it from the Uganda Stock Exchange, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for at least giving us that attention. Let's go to the Nairobi Securities Exchange before going on to the markets internationally. Now, the Nairobi Securities Exchange has over 66 listings, and amongst these on Friday, 47 of them participated in trade, with Stanbic Holdings as the biggest gainer. The data from Nairobi Securities Exchange shows that we had 2.16 million shares that were traded in at least 748 deals, corresponding to a market value of 30.2 million Kenyan shillings. Trading for the day compared with the previous day showed an 86% decline in the volume and an 86% decline in the turnover and a 15% decline in the number of deals. In aggregate, at least 47 of the 66 listings participated in trade, ending the day with at least 9 gainers and 33 losers on the market. You can think about your family at home before you go back and see if you could fit into such a market. The Stanbic Holdings stock in Kenya performed so well that they had almost a gain of 10% on every single price at the close of the day. Closing off with at least 111.75 million Kenyan shillings. It was followed by Britam Holdings with a 2.4% appreciation, whereas British American Tobacco Kenya at least also appreciated by 2.2%, and the Elam Fahari Real Estate Investment Trust, or the REIT, was also fixed with a 1.93% appreciation. On the losing side, Samia Africa came out last with an end-of-day depreciation of at least 9.36%, and at exactly 2.13 Kenyan shillings per share. And it was followed by Home Africa with a 7.89% depreciation in price. Ever Ready East Africa at least also depreciated by 7.36%. Uchumi Supermarket also had a value of 5.26% that was shared off. Now, Safaricom had at least the biggest number of shares with at least over 440,300 shares traded, followed by Kenya Power with at least 371,200 shares, and Cooperative Bank of Kenya with 360,100 shares that were traded on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. Regarding the performance of the indices, the NSE 20 appreciated by 0.52%, and this tracks the aggregate performance of the top 20 stocks. So you have some of the top stocks like Absa, Stanbic Bank Holdings, and a couple of other top stocks in Kenya performing quite well. The NSE 10, however, declined on the other hand with a decline of 0.28%, whereas the NSE 25 appreciated by 0.31%. And that's it from Nairobi Securities Exchange. Remember, this year we are vying for the integration of the East African capital markets. And one of the things that the Nairobi Securities Exchange is putting in place is at least an open market where the different East Africans can be able to list and be able to also trade or buy and sell. We've also had a couple of efforts by the CEO of the Nairobi Securities Exchange through the East African Association of Stock Exchanges and the Africa Exchange Stock Association, which has been there to integrate the markets and try to bring them together for a better market. Generally, the market would be much, much healthier if we had such integrations working, if we had at least people being coming together, if we had a couple of investors as well across the East African land coming into other markets in the continent, in the West African market, and eventually having an African market would be a very wise idea. I don't know what the others think, but it would be my opinion that it would be a very, very wise and brilliant idea for us to have such a market. But that's it from the Uganda and Nairobi stock exchanges. Now let's move ahead to the international markets. Now Europe stocks have fallen as traders weigh in on interest rates. According to Bloomberg, the European stocks fell as traders weighed the outlook of the monetary policy ahead of a raft of speeches by the policymakers at the World Economic Forum in Davos this week. The stocks Europe 600 index slipped by 0.2%, extending a lackluster start to the year after a 13% rise in 2023. Now, the basic resources and car makers led the decline after Germany's economy dodged a recession through, although of course the latest data showed it contracted for the first time since the pandemic last year, and Germany's 10-year yield at least rose about 3 basis points, looking at least for the international markets. The European Central Bank will lower also interest rates 4 times this year as inflation retreats more quickly than previously anticipated, according to the Bloomberg poll of economists. But ECB chief economist, Mr. Philip Lane, dampened the expectations of a rapid easing when he said in an interview published at the weekend that cutting rates too early would be self-defeating, according to the ECB Governing Council member as well, Mr. Robert Holzmann. Now, among the individual stocks in Europe, some of the stocks that slumped included the Dassault Aviation, which slumped as much as 10% after the French aircraft maker reported a decline in 2023 jet orders. Just East Takeaway.com as well declined, and HelloFresh SE as well dropped after Exen analysts recommended at least steering clear of Europe's food delivery sector. The US equity index futures were flat with cash, at least the cash stock and treasury markets closed on the Monday for a public holiday, and of course a gauge of the dollar gained after a surprise decline in the US producer prices at least which were reinforced on Friday after the great speeches there from the big people on the stock markets in Europe. Generally speaking, across America as well, the stocks eased up a little bit, with the S&P 500 closing off at 4,783 and the Dow Jones closing off at 37,590, whereas the Nasdaq at least closed off at 14,970 points. And that's it definitely from across the world and the different other parts of the market. That's it generally from us as well. You can follow for more on our website at www.smart24tv.com. You can also follow us on X, at least at Smart24TV now, for more of your latest content. Thank you so much for the time, and I wish you a very lovely day ahead, and we'll catch up next time. Have a good night.